Welcome back to the channel, everyone, and happy holidays. Today, in our next video lesson on the backhand series, is a video lesson I call Wawrinka's main engine. So today we're taking a deep dive into the main power sources in what drives Wawrinka's great one-handed backhand, and we're starting with Wawrinka because myself, along with most analysts, think that he is at the top of the list for all-time great one-handed backhands. And we're going to be spending time today and for future lessons on more of Wawrinka, but we're going to look mostly at the main body sources of his power today. This is what Stan talks about when people ask him about where he gets his great one-handed backhand. He always talks about the body and things to do with his legs and his hips and the power coming from his body. He never talks about his grip or his swing or anything to do with his arm. It's all about the main power sources, and that's what we'll concentrate on as well. So when we look at the requirements for a great modern topspin backhand or forehand, we're talking about producing great racket head speed, and we're talking about extremely vertical path through the contact area, much more vertical than the recreational player tends to think about the swing path. It's 25 to 35% vertical through this moments of contact, and so our body has to prepare us and execute this kind of swing, executing great speed and power, but also this verticality in the swing. And those are going to be the focus of today. So I've broken this lesson into three major areas. The first, posture and footwork. The second, recentering and maximum loading. And then the unwinding process is the third section. So these are things that you don't have to wait forever to improve upon. They're things that you can start to feel today and improve today, but also things that you can work on really for the rest of your tennis career as well. And you will need to pay attention to it as you move along in skill level. So we'll be looking at these three areas: posture and footwork, recentering and maximum loading, and the unwinding process related to the Wawrinka model, which is, again, really represents the ideal of what I've been trying to teach you on the forehand and backhand side in these series. This is a body-led and body-driven type of swing. So I'll play a clip or two of Wawrinka's backhand, and to show you that I've been working on this, I'll show you my version of Wawrinka as well, and then let's get started. So we'll begin with talking about the reorienting footwork that's involved with the one-handed backhand. And we'll look at Wawrinka's return posture and return footwork at first, because it illustrates a lot of the things that we want to incorporate whenever we're out on the court and we're thinking about executing a new topspin forehand. So I mentioned in the very first backhand series article how the big problem, in my opinion, in the backhand is one of width and depth, meaning that because our dominant arm and lead arm is to the front of our body when we reorient a little, then so our hitting arm is to the front of our body, which means that we have to get this racket with enough width and depth behind us and around us so that we can build momentum and power to unleash in a swinging stroke. On the forehand side, we don't have that issue, and that's the reason we can have open stance forehands, is that our hitting arm is to the rear of us, and so the width and depth problem is taken care of pretty much automatically a little bit with that. And on the backhand side, for at least a one-hander, we really don't have much of an open stance ability to hit. Yes, on the defensive, and we don't have enough time, returns, etc. You know, we may hit an open stance one-handed backhand, but it really doesn't have much power. It's one of the great advantages of the two-hander, is that there's more of this inherent rotational power with two-handed take back and execution. But we're mostly focused on the one hand, although two-handers can get a lot from this video as well, I believe. In all my videos, I believe I mentioned that we need to assume an athletic posture in order to execute a high-level stroke, and we'll go into that in more detail. So the difference between Wawrinka's normal posture, if he's just on the baseline, you know, in a ground stroke rally, is that in that kind of rally situation, the forward tilt of his torso is probably just 10 or 15%. And it's a little difficult to pick up that what he's doing because he's running all over, and you know, each stroke appears differently. So we sort of lose perspective that this is indeed the normal ground stroke preparation posture. But we need to look at this more deeply. And the difference between his regular ground stroke footwork and his return stance and posture is when he starts his stance, as you see in the background of this slide as well, he gets way down here and he's tilted, you know, 40, 50 degrees down in a waiting position. So his pelvis is down, his butt is sticking out. That shows that he's hinging at his hips. We have a tendency to stand straight and then bend with our back. We don't want that. We want to hinge our hips back, our butt back. Remember that? And we want a level lower spine. You can have a slight hunch here, but basically we're trying for a straight plane up with our back, even when we're in a deep position like Wawrinka. So that's his starting return posture, is very much down here, deep, steep. And in fact, this is the very start of his solution to the width and depth problem on the one-handed backhand, because you can see that if I'm standing straight here like most recreational players do, where my hands hang down, they hang next to my body. There's no space between my arms. They're touching on the sides of my body. So if we're trying to execute a turn with this, a take back, and my arms are touching the end core of my body as I'm trying to do this, it's restricting it. So the great thing about just understanding the Wawrinka posture and this tremendous forward tilt that he gets is that his hands, just as I hang my hands down here, see how much room I have between my arms and my body? This is really the essence of the solution that Wawrinka has. So once he has his arms away from his body holding a racket here, then he has all the room to turn and have a deep drop back with his arm structure and setting up his rotational swing. So that's why I want to particularly focus on having you really see what Wawrinka is doing on his return posture and his reorienting footwork. Again, the reorienting, the reason so important is, again, recreational players tend to stand too vertical, which means that they have trouble loading, taking the racket back with any width or coil, and especially on the backhand, and that we tend then to just have this linear path swing, which doesn't have any speed and power or consistency. So if the camera is the opponent and I'm getting ready down in I have to reorient myself out in this direction, so I'm partially turning with my back to the target here. And with that turn, it gives me so much more room to swing my arms back and deep and create the take back that we want. So the reorienting posture is hugely important, and you could improve your game today by just focusing that on your warm-up. Is see if you can get more reoriented, and we'll go through all the footwork issues, but instead of facing your opponent directly or even a partial turn, which after a while players kind of learn partially, that's not reorienting enough. You need to get 30 to 60 degrees oriented left if that's the target. That will give you so much more ability to load and swing the racket. The second video in this backhand series I called The Immutable Laws of Swinging. And if you haven't seen that, I recommend that you go back and take a look at that, because it explains in even some more substantial detail some key concepts. And one of those key concepts is that in all high-level throwing and swinging actions, we do not do that from a vertical posture, but from a tilted spine posture. A forward tilt to some degree, 10 to 20 degrees typically in tennis, but it's even steeper in other sports like golf. Every single golfer that you'll ever see, when they're set up, and there's a tremendous amount of instruction about this setup, is, again, we have a hinge in the hips, we have slightly flexed knees, and we have a forward tilt of 30 to 40 degrees in golf, because and we have a side bending of the spine, a lateral bend, and I'll explain why. Because if you look at our spine, you can see in the background here the slide I created with how the spine, what kind of rotational capability each section of the spine has. So this first 5 vertebrae right from our pelvis, the lumbar spine, is built for stability and for standing vertical and lifting great weights, but it has almost no rotational ability to rotate around that part of our spine. In order to be able to rotate and swing and throw effectively, we have to access the mid-back and the chest area. They call it the thoracic spine, the 12 vertebrae there, and the cervical spine, which is around the neck. There we have the ability to rotate 40 degrees each way if we have got ourselves side forward tilted with a slight side bend. The side bend creates the separation between the lumbar spine and the chest and the thoracic spine. And we need that separation, otherwise we'll be trying to turn around something that we can't really rotate around. So we have the forward tilt, and if we're in a hitting posture, we have a slight side tilt. So my right shoulder and my right hip are coming closer together, 5 or 10 degrees, depending on sort of what kind of shot I'm making, but there's always some sort of side bending in our spine, forward and side bending. And that then gives us the ability to rotate on this plane. In golf, with a more forward tilt, we have a take back that's rotating back and up, spiraling back and up. We talked about that in the forehand side. Spiral up and back, and remaining in this forward and side bend. Then we can rotate through and up on this plane. That's how the golf swing works. In baseball, there's something similar. So we sometimes see the baseball players start very vertical like this, relaxed. But when the ball comes and they're ready to swing, then something totally different happens. Then we have some of the same things. We have the forward tilt, we have the side tilt. And now the baseball player is in a position to swing the bat 70 or 80 miles an hour around their rotating body, and up at about a 10-degree angle. That's what the angle you need to swing at to hit a ball over the fence, and what we want to do in baseball. But then we said tennis has its own unique challenges, which is that instead of a 10% plane as we have in baseball, we have a much more vertical plane, 25 to 35% up here through contact. So we are rotating in this very accentuated vertical path. And so we have to orient our body with a forward tilt, a side tilt, and other things in order to produce that. Golf, with a more forward tilt, we have a take back that's rotating back and up, spiraling back and up. We talked about that in the forehand side. Spiral up and back, and remaining in this forward and side bend. Then we can rotate through and up on this plane. That's how the golf swing works. In baseball, there's something similar. So we sometimes see the baseball players start very vertical like this, relaxed. But when the ball comes and they're ready to swing, then something totally different happens. Then we have some of the same things. We have the forward tilt, we have the side tilt. And now the baseball player is in a position to swing the bat 70 or 80 miles an hour around their rotating body, and up at about a 10-degree angle. That's what the angle you need to swing at to hit a ball over the fence, and what we want to do in baseball. But then we said tennis has its own unique challenges, which is that instead of a 10% plane as we have in baseball, we have a much more vertical plane, 25 to 35% up here through contact. So we are rotating in this very accentuated vertical path. And so we have to orient our body with a forward tilt, a side tilt, and other things in order to produce that. As I said in the previous video, understanding these principles is so important because our arms will tend to swing at a 90-degree angle to our spine tilt. So if we're standing vertical like I am now, like most players do, recreational players do, their swing path is going to be 90% of my spine tilt, which makes this a fairly horizontal swing path. So it's going to be virtually impossible to produce the very accentuated vertical swing path we want through contact with this vertical posture. And this is in all swinging and throwing actions, as you can see in the slides in the background, is a universal law of swinging, is that we throw or swing on a tilted forward and lateral bend of our spine, and the swing path is always 90 degrees to that tilt. So if we're way down here, we can have this kind of, and You know, if we're standing a little bit, you know, we can still rotate up in the right way. In the background here, I'm showing a great former tennis player, Suzanne Lenglen. And this is what I mentioned many times, is that the way we used to play tennis was much more in this vertical posture. And you can see Suzanne Lenglen, where the French stadium is named after, in the French Open, one of the stadiums. So playing from very vertical posture, which means that if they have any rotation at all, it's going to be around this lumbar spine, this very vertical part of the spine, which you can't really get much rotation on. So your path is going to be very linear and it's going to be very flat, like I'm showing you. And I'm using the analogy of a Ferris wheel in this series of slides here. And I mentioned that not only was tennis played in this vertical posture all the way back in the 20s, but all the way up into the 1980s. And I've provided, and I'll provide again, a link to John McEnroe's ground strokes. And he played from a very erect posture. Still does when he plays. And he was the #1 player in the world in 1984. Now, gradually in the 90s, that changed a little with Agassi and Sampras, but still it wasn't until the 2000s that we really saw the athleticism of Federer and company, you know, change this model to what I am calling the kinetic whip model, which is body-led and body-driven. And that creates a whole new need for a different kind of posture than this vertical one. So if the Ferris wheel is this vertical posture, again, the shoulders are at 90 degrees to that vertical posture, and our arms tend to swing at the same level as our shoulders. So a flat horizontal swing. So the image in our minds, the movement map in our minds, we need to change from this vertical Ferris wheel posture to a tilted Ferris wheel, as I'm showing you in the background. So the Ferris wheel is tilted 10 or 20 degrees down normally, maybe more in Wawrinka's posture. And the swing path now can be 90 degrees of that posture. And now we're going to see this unfolding of this kind of path, much more vertical. As we come out of this and straighten our body a little bit, we start to get naturally this 25 to 35% rise that we need to generate topspin. So looking at the difference between Wawrinka's return posture, just getting ready, and the normal vertical posture of the recreational player. When the recreational player is standing vertical like this, the midline of the body is going, the pressure is going through the mid part of the ankle here, as my stick indicates. And everything is stacked on top of one another. The pelvis is very stable under here, but it's not very difficult to move from this posture. So, and we'll go through this when we go through the deliberate practice section. So we're going to have a very practice this much deeper posture that Wawrinka has in his return. So we're going to have the chest way down here, 45, 50 degrees. And immediately that changes the dynamics of everything. So now the pressure balance point moves from my mid ankle into the balls of my feet. And so now I can shift my balance between the balls of my feet, which is what you'll see in a moment when I play Wawrinka's video. And we'll have some pressure in our quads, you know, the muscles in our thighs and above our knee. And we'll have this straight line back. And we'll be able to rock back and forth, ready to move. And so this is Wawrinka's ready position, and we'll play him just doing that and just rocking back and forth in this forward position. So now the pelvis has become unweighted. So now we can move instead of having all the pressure down through the middle of our body. Now this deep return posture is just his ready posture. When the ball comes, then you're going to see his torso rise and this forward tilt be less. And this gives him a unweighting of the pelvis that enables him to then start to reposition his feet much easier. And so in that movement from the deep return posture to the more upright posture but still tilted, we see his weight go even more forward into the forward part of his feet, into the front part of the balls of his feet, not quite his toes. And we'll see his heels lift up. So he's unweighting his whole body, his whole center of his pelvis. And now in that unweighting, now that's the preliminary phase to actually moving his feet. So the key movement is as he comes up into his react position and he's more forward, his heels have been unweighted, is that now he can, because he's been shifting his balance, he has one last balance shift into his right side here, right foot, so he can unweight his left foot a little bit, and that enables him to turn it out. And that's the key move on the forehand or the backhand side. We have to have this little turnout move. Now, how much he turns it out varies according to what kind of shot he thinks he's going to get. If he thinks he's in more of an attacking, moving forward mode, you know, he might just turn it out 30%. And I'll show you that in a second. If he's in a more defensive mode of turning right away on the return anyway, his foot might be stepping out 90 degrees from this forward position. Or if he thinks he has to go backwards in some way to load more, it could even be 120 degree turnout. All with in one step he can do it. So we're rocking back and forth, we're ready, we're reading the ball where it's gonna go, and then we shift into our right side, if we're right-handed, and then we turn out. We lift up and turn out. And we can get all the way reoriented, that's so key, just in one move. Now, typically, you have to use a couple more steps to do this because the ball's not going to come right to you. So there might be an initial turnout, and then you might have another step or two, and then a final turnout move. So it could be a sequence, and there's so many different variations of this. We don't want to get bogged down to all this. You can practice those separately, and we'll get into that a little bit more in the later series of lessons. Right now, we're just thinking about this tilted forward position and the rocking on the balls of our feet, knees bent, very dynamic weighting mode. And then as we start to rise up, Whether you take a hop step or not, it doesn't really matter. It's just that we're in the balls of our feet and that we're unweighting ourselves to some degree, and then we can put the weight into our right side and turn however many steps we want. But it's the turnout that we'll be practicing. So even when we have got the reorientation that we want, we're still not loaded. All we've done is reorient ourselves. So in order to load, we need to take a step with our right side, if we're right-handed, so that we put some weight into that, and then push back and load the trail leg, which means typically the trail leg foot is placed slightly, inward. It can be, perpendicular, but usually it's slightly inward. The hip and shin are inside the foot, so we're not falling back, we're slightly tilted forward. And we're sinking into this trail side so that the hip is externally rotating in this socket and dropping and putting pressure into the ground. We're putting pressure into the ground and turning, coiling around this left hip socket. There's a lot more to be said about this, and we will talk about it in more detail, but we're talking big picture now. So we're turning, getting reoriented, and then we're gonna load the trail side. And then the next step is the step into the swing. So this step has, to understand this step, we have to understand the overall model of our stroke, which is a rotational model. You'll have many instructors saying you get power by stepping towards the target on the forehand or the backhand side. That's not really what we're doing. We're stepping in a way, entering our rotational mode of swinging. And you can see this clearly with Wawrinka, who has one of the most accentuated sort of rotational steps, where if he has time to do this, he's balanced on his trail foot in some manner or form, and he's coiled back. We'll get into all that. But then he steps, and he doesn't step just straight typically. He'll step with this turn in of the foot, as I'm showing you, and you'll see in the video. So why does he do that? It's because he's creating stretch and load in his pelvis area and his legs. So he's stretching this whole area out with this forward step. And you see this, whether the great one-handers as well. Gasquet does it quite a bit as well. So you don't always have the chance to do this, but if we're talking about maximum loading and trying to do that as often as possible, we want to work on this little turn of step and stretching of this pelvis area. So as Wawrinka steps, he's also sinking. This is the recentering move that we've talked about on the forehand side. We do it on the backhand side as well. So we have some weight and momentum into our lead side. So as we get down, and sometimes people call this a squatting action, our hips get actually deeper here. And once this lead leg is weighted, we transferred the weight into it and we have pressure there, then that enables us to load the upper torso, the upper swing center better. Because with this bracing, I have something to pull against my torso. And I'll show you how that works with a little device here in a second. So as Wawrinka steps, lowers, embraces to some degree with his front side here, then that creates the stability so that I can use my arm structure and my back scap here to pull back. And the back trail scap is critical in this. We'll get into it in other lessons. But basically I can pull back and stretch this whole area of my torso, my chest, and whatnot. So this is some stretchy bands with a handle to kind of give you a sense of the power dynamic of this. Is that, so he is stepping, and then he is starting to rotate his pelvis, and that creates the stability in the lower side so that I can pull back, load back here, and my lead arm will start to come up against my chest and compress. We talked about this in the frisbee throw. Well, in the loading phase, the arm gets very compressed against my chest. As this coil deepens and all my back is involved in loading, and I'm loading all these muscles in this torso area so that I can release that in the swing. And even as we start from the slot, on the backhand particularly, we will see this arm compressed against the chest. So I'm starting to rotate with my body, and I'm turning into this rotation with my body, and this arm is being pushed up against my chest. And that's the way we want it. And that's a sign that someone is really rotating with their body. What we see in lesser players and even some one-handed professional players, quite often when they get nervous, is that instead of this arm staying compressed as we start into the swing, the arm will separate from the body. And it's a sure sign that the player is moving into an arm-driven and arm-led kind of swing, which is going to have all kinds of erratic problems as we go through contact and lose a lot of the power and speed. We have to keep this arm compressed until we get the turn of the swing, and then as we turn up and in, then the arm does come up and is released in this blazing fast rotation up. But we can't release it too early or we lose all the dynamic of this coiled, tilted axis around our spine. Now from the maximum loaded position in the slot, where we have racket has dropped into the slotted position, and we'll get into those in other lessons. We're just looking at the main sources of power now. Just as we had on the forehand side, the first movement out of the slot is not pointing the butt of the racket or the hand and going towards the target. We're really, because we've oriented ourselves 36 degrees left, we're going to be pulling with our body, turning into our core rotation, compression of the arm. And the hand is going to be traveling out here to the left and pulling the racket with the whole body out to the left. And the head of the racket will line up in this pulling action, not flip out, which it will if you start thinking about reorienting the butt of the racket immediately towards the target. And we're not rotating immediately hard and aggressively at the target either. There is this transitional move where we're gathering momentum, letting the racket gather momentum behind our pull, and it's only when we get to the pivot of the body towards the target, the turn of the swing, is that then this racket is going to be released So the head will travel up and around the pulling hand and up. And it's a releasing move at that point that accounts for the angular momentum of this turn, where we're pulling the handle up and around our body, that creates all the speed in the swing, not a movement of the hand or the racket towards the target. That's not going to get you anywhere except 20 miles an hour. If we want a 70 or 80 mile an hour swing, we need to rotate this around our body, and as we pass, we need to pull up on the handle and around with our body, not with our arm. So we just can't do it. So that's why we have to keep this arm compressed as long as possible and keep our coiling around our tilted axis. That's going to be the main engine that propels the Wawrinka great topspin swing. So the other thing that powers the swing, of course, is this great pelvis movement and rotation of his lower body. And part of that is as he sinks and recenters and then starts to unwind, then as he starts to get to the turn of the swing, then there is a straightening of his legs. So this will help us pull the racket handle up naturally in a very accelerated way, just by the straightening of his legs. And yes, the body finally relaxes and comes vertical at that point, but we're staying in our tilted posture all the way through contact. And then as we pass through contact and the follow through, then we have this expansion and straightening. But the legs play a very important role in the Wawrinka power sources in terms of sinking and straightening as he unwinds. And you'll be amazed yourself as you practice this later, how much power you get from this straightening of the legs movement. And further, again, touching on past articles, in terms of this unwinding process, we're letting the arms unwind around this rotating core, and the energy, yes, it moves up from the ground up into our shoulder and out to our hand, but the energy in the kinetic chain process also moves from the core of the body around the axis. They call the proximate to the core, out to the distal areas, the hands and the arms outside of our body. So there's two ways the energy is moving up from the ground, accelerating, but also accelerating from our core around this turning core of our axis out into our arms, and we're releasing that energy again passively, like I demonstrated with the frisbee throw and in our other throwing actions. Our arms are not being active, they're being driven by the body's rotation, and we allow that to happen in this unfurling, this slinging manner. We're not actively moving and driving this action with our arm. It's just to be released as a result of the body's rotation. So 2 or 3 takeaways for this movement map section of this lesson. The first takeaway is just emphasizing the ability to move from this vertical posture and stiff posture and immobile posture to an athletic posture, a tilted posture. And there can be a steep version or a shallow version depending on what kind of ball we're hitting, and all kinds of different variations. But the constant is the need for tilting and pressure into the balls of our feet, bent knees, straight back, as we are moving into the swing mode. Now, I want to say a few things about the athleticism that's required in different sports. And not to say that they're necessarily better athletes, but athleticism and general movement are a little bit different in each of these sports. You can see in golf, someone like John Daly, who was a top player, won a couple Grand Slams, was the longest driver on the tour, in golf, you know, and he was weighing over 300 pounds more at times. So there's a certain athleticism required in golf for sure, and but you know, it's quite a bit different than the athleticism that we'll see that required in tennis. So in golf, we have the player athlete is hitting from a stationary position with the ball between his feet, and it's always this way. This is a constant in golf, every golf shot, more or less. In baseball, we also have a stationary athlete swinging in a batter's box with a plate in a certain orientation, and the pitcher is pitching from exactly the same position, 60 feet 6 inches away on a 10-inch high mound. So the ball's coming down always at a certain downward trajectory, and the player doesn't even have to swing in baseball unless the ball comes in between his knees and its mid-chest, the strike zone. Otherwise, you can just let it go. So there's a lot of athletic skill required in all of this, of course. But if you look at the athleticism that has been shown, you know, they've had players that weigh, you know, over 300 pounds again, who are some of the top all-time baseball hitters. And they even have designated hitters that don't do anything but hit. That's a certain kind of athleticism involved in all that, but it's fairly limited. All I have to do is roll them up to the plate and swing. Now in tennis, the player is constantly moving, except on the serve or return maybe, but generally constantly moving, and the ball is constantly moving, and the player has to hit every ball wherever the ball is placed. There's no strike zone. And so this general movement and the challenge of hitting a moving ball is so much greater in tennis. It has a certain, much more of an athletic challenge, I think. Again, it doesn't mean that tennis players are better athletes, because you can have great athletes in all these sports, but it's just general athleticism and movement that's much more required, I think, in tennis. And that's obviously why, you know, you can see Stan Wawrinka only weighs 180 pounds and he's kind of a beefy guy. You know, you hardly ever see a player over 200 pounds, certainly not 250, playing at any very high level, at the professional level. So there's just a certain general athleticism that's going to be required of you to be a higher level player in tennis. And we just have to accept that challenge, and it's part of the things that can make us proud. And the second takeaway is just the necessity for, you know, de-leveling our shoulders and getting in this tilted position to swing. As our shoulders tilt and de-level, so will our swing path. And the swing path will always be roughly 90 degrees of our spine tilt. So the very first thing is get the spine tilt right for whatever shot we're going to face, and be ready to accept the challenge of that, and not try to move around and hit in this vertical posture. It's really going to be impossible to have a high level topspin shot with that kind of movement pattern. So the final takeaway in this section is, if we can get the body's form right, the swing path will pretty much take care of itself. Yes, there's all kinds of things that we'll get into with the arms and structure and the grip, but from the large perspective, the swing path will be taken care of if we get the right posture. And this is going to require you to practice it deliberately. You're not going to walk out one day and suddenly have the right depth of posture and balance and whatnot. You're going to be going back to your vertical posture. So this is something that has to be practiced deliberately and focused on deliberately. That's again why random practice with your pals really isn't much of a practice at all. It's just reinforcing your old patterns. You have to go out deliberately and work on these posture, alignment, balance issues as a foundational piece to your tennis game. We're now in our deliberate practice section. This is the how-to section of the lesson. And as usual, I have to read you my injury prevention precautions. First, don't do these exercises if you're injured or sore. Secondly, stop the exercise immediately if you feel any pain or discomfort. 3, do all the exercises in an athletic posture to enable healthy rotation and dynamic movement. We've talked a lot about the structure of the spine and what we need to have a tilted basis for rotation, and we have to rotate around our mid-back area where we have lots of rotational capability and not around our lumbar spine. So it's very important to keep these things in mind as you do these exercises, and start exercise every program slowly. Check for injury or soreness the next day before increasing to maximum type speeds. So going into this section, I want to remind you of what our goal is for this first lesson on the Wawrinka backhand, is that we're just trying to become acquainted with a new set of feels that come with this backhand technique. And if you really want one takeaway for this whole lesson, is you must feel it to fix it. So the goal is not necessarily to master anything at this first stage, but try it out, try to acquire the feel, and we'll go from there. The very first feel, and maybe the most important feel of this whole lesson, is to try to feel the Wawrinka return and react posture. So we're going to set down our racket like we usually do starting these lessons, and we're going to, in this 1-minute exercise, I want you to feel the difference between standing in this vertical posture, which you may probably stand in all the time in tennis, and this deep set athletic posture that Wawrinka has, starting with a chest way down here, 40 or 50% bend, your hips back way out, the pressure moving from your heels, your ankles, into the balls of your feet, and being able to rock back and forth here for a minute. And before you do the rocking, I just want you to feel the difference in spacing between standing here with my arms to my side and then this deep posture. And I want you to just let your arms hang vertical here, straight down, and feel how much room there is now between your arms and your body. And that you're going to use this in this first exercise just to slow motion go through this tilted Ferris wheel swing of your arms. So we're hanging our arms down, and then we're not going to do anything too extreme with our back or trunk. We're just going to be trying to swing up the backhand side, rotate our hips a little and our legs, however feel comfortable. See if we can emulate that 25 to 30% vertical rise through contact, just in a relaxed manner, slow manner, and letting our arms fling out as we turn. Let them extend and unfurl out on their own. Don't be directing your arms. Let your body throw your arms around this swing. So I want you to do this exercise just for a minute. I'll pause the video for you to do 10 tilted Ferris wheels as Wawrinka would do it on the backhand side. I'll pause the video. In the next exercise, I want you to pick up the racket. Once again, you'll assume the deep return position of Wawrinka, rocking, balancing on the balls of your feet, buttocks way back. And then I want you to do a little forward react position mode, as I showed you in the video, where you're going to be, trunk is going to be rising up to only 10 degrees or 20 degrees tilt from way down here. And I want you to move with a little hop into your balls of your feet and balance there. So a little bit of a hop. And now we're in the react mode, ready to go into dynamic movement. So I want you to do 10 of those. You can pause between each one, try to refine this a little bit better each time. Make sure that you're getting deep enough and that you're really feeling the unweighting as you rise up with your spine and get further into the balls of your feet. I'll pause the video. In the next exercise, I want you to practice the Wawrinka step out. So, and I want you to go from the deep posture to the react mode, a little bounce, and then I want you to envision that you're attacking a backhand and you're able to step forward a little bit into the court, just one step. So we're up, step, and then we're taking a little 30-degree step here. And I want you to do 10 of those and see if you can make it smooth and quick each time, working out any little bugs, but you're remaining in your posture throughout the whole series. So we're not getting here and then standing straight up again. No, you know, even in this posture, we're still in the tilted, still have the knees bent, still have the butt back. So we don't want to lose our posture as we move. I'll pause the video for 10 of these. In the next exercise, I want you to go all the way from 30 degrees to 120 degrees turnout in one step. So we're going down here and then we're rocking, we're coming up, unweighting, and then we're gonna turn all the way back so that our back is truly facing the target. And we're ready for a big wind up. And we're gonna be in our tilted posture even when we turn back. We're not gonna straighten up. So 120 degree turn, 10 reps. I'll pause the video. The next exercise in our sequence is the step and recentering move that Wawrinka has. So, and here you can probably just start from the react position, so not so deeply tilted, but more like the normal movement, bouncing between your balls of your feet still though, and with still a tilt. Back, level, straight, not bent over like this. And we're bouncing, and we're gonna do our step out at 30 degrees and then more of an attacking backhand. And I want you to do the recentering so that even when we turn, after we turn and we're stepping, we're sinking. Our whole pelvis is sinking. There's weight going into both legs and in a balanced way. And we're getting in sort of a more deep posture with our butt further back. Feeling that, you know, our legs and our pelvis particularly are getting more loaded as we do this, and a little bit of more of a side bend here on your hitting side. So this movement, slight crunching between your shoulder and your hip. This will bring the weight into your lead leg and your momentum a little bit more forward. We don't want to be out over our skis. We still want to have our torso centered in this position, but we do want some momentum going into the ground through our lead foot. So from the 10 reps, from the react position, a 30% step, and then a recentering. I'll pause the video. In the next exercise, we're practicing the Wawrinka maximum loading position. So that will be a step at 30 degrees out and a recentering. Now we're stable with our lead leg. And then I want you to, as you step and recenter, I want you to pull back this lead arm like I showed you, using your elbow back here, pulling back further. And I want you to stretch this, stretch it back. And you can let it fall maybe a little bit into the slot. But we're trying to feel that maximum loading position where our pelvis is loaded, but now we're loading our torso and our arm and racket, and our lead arm is compressed against our chest. And you feel a stretch all the way across the chest, you know, in this position. You feel it in your back as our backs turn to the target, stretching, stretching. I'll pause the video for 10 reps of maximum loading. Pause. And now, next exercise in this cycle is the unwinding process. So we've gone through the maximum loading, and we're going to start the forward part of our swing, but we're turned to the side with our 30% step. We've loaded, but we're not going to swing our shoulders and arms towards the target or a racket, but immediately towards the target, like we know we shouldn't do. We're going to try to swing out here to the left initially with the racket lagging straight behind us. Just this move. Slight rise but keeping the arm pretty much compressed against the chest in this move. And crunching our side a little bit more. So 10 reps of the first movement from the slot. I'll pause the video. The next sequence is the turn of the swing. It's the release of all this stored energy that we've been building up with this model. So we have taken our step, we've pulled back to our maximum load, we've started our swing out to the side, but now we're going to feel more of the swivel and pivot of our hips towards the target. And if we turn our foot a little bit angled more towards the target, like I showed you, you'll feel that twisting in the hip area. You don't have to do it extreme at the beginning, you're just trying to feel it. And after this has just about stopped, then our arm and our torso can just unwind on its own. And the arm can come off. And we want to make sure that we're going through this tilted Ferris wheel path. And we haven't resumed our horizontal swinging path and straightened our body. We're going to stay in our posture all the way through the release, and then as we pass into contact, we can straighten our pelvis and our legs a little bit, like Wawrinka. I just want you to do it in slow motion at the beginning, making sure that you're keeping this tilted Ferris wheel rotation path. I'll pause the video for 10 slow motion reps. The next sequence is to add more dynamic movement and speed to this. I don't want a maximum effort at this point because this is too new a movement to be doing maximum efforts, maximum speed, but a medium paced swing up in this tilted Ferris wheel manner from the react position, the step, the twist, the sinking, and the release on this Ferris wheel path. 10 medium speeds. I'll pause the video. Now hopefully throughout the coming weeks you'll be practicing shadow footwork, 30%, 90% turnout, 120% degree turnout, moving from the deep posture to the react to the bounce, smoothing these movements out, practicing them over and over again. Each day they'll get a little bit more comfortable. But now for this exercise, I want you to take our concepts out to your court with your training partner. And, you know, we want you to hit some balls using this technique, but I don't want you to have to go through all the read-react phases. I basically want you to start in a tilted posture with some weight in your trail leg, your orientation already set, or ready to take a step. Your partner feeds you a ball to the backhand side, nice, slow, medium bouncing ball. And we're just taking the step, sinking, and trying to release medium speed, and hitting a topspin backhand like Wawrinka would hit it. But we're practicing and concentrating on our form rather than the results and where the ball is going. We don't really care too much about that at this point. We're just trying to get the form of the body, and that we haven't gone back to our old routine of straightening up too soon, flattening out the swing path, that we're truly getting this 25 to 35% vertical through contact. So I'll pause the video for 10 reps of those. And then finally, the same exercise, but let's do it at fast speed, not maximum speed. I don't want anything crazy rotation, but we can speed up a medium speed and just add a little bit more dynamic flair to our movement just to see how it feels, ensuring that we're keeping on the tilted axis of this swing path. And let's do 10 reps. I'll pause the video. That's the end of our lesson today, and I want to wish everyone Happy New Year. This is New Year's Day 2025, and this is the day we make New Year's resolutions, right? So I have a resolution to recommend to you, which is to adopt a goat this year. Pick out one of the goats on the forehand side that we've covered, Nadal, Federer, Djokovic, whoever you like, and use that as a model for developing your game on the forehand side. Similarly, on the backhand side, we'll be covering other great backhanders besides Wawrinka, Gasquet, etc. Pick out one of those and make that your model for the coming year. So, am I saying that you should become a goat whisperer? Well, yes, but with a twist. I want the goat to whisper to you and to see how good your game gets this year. Happy New Year.